So let's start with the latest clashes that have happened between India and China. This is on the contested border, the line of actual control between both countries. We've had a similar incident a couple of years ago, and this now seems to be a bit of a pattern where the Chinese side seems to be very violently and very aggressively pressing its claims, much like what we've seen China do on its disputed maritime boundaries with Japan or South Korea or Vietnam, Philippines, etc. What are your thoughts on what's been going on between China and some of these other countries, including the latest one in Taiwan?
Well, I've long believed that the more powerful China becomes, the more aggressive it will become. I believe that ultimately China wants to dominate Asia the way the United States dominates the Western Hemisphere. And of course, China has a number of territorial disputes, one of which is with India. And the Chinese are interested, as you would expect, to settle that border dispute with India on terms that are favorable to China. At this point in time, the Indians are not powerful enough to do that. And furthermore, they have bigger fish to fry with regard to issues like Taiwan, the East China Sea, and the South China Sea. But there's no question that this is going to be an ongoing problem. And as China becomes more powerful, the Chinese government will try to sort of settle the conflict on its own terms.
Yeah, my second question. So clearly there is a power differential, a military differential right now between China and India. China is the bigger military power, and there is, of course, the history of the last major war that both countries fought in 1962, which India lost. What can a country like India do in this interim as this border is being hotly contested and there is a power differential, and perhaps both countries realize that a full-fledged, full-throttle war is not an option?
Well, I think what India can do is build up its conventional forces as much as possible. And every time the Chinese probe, meet them on the battlefield, so to speak, and do everything in India's power to check Chinese aggression. And I think another thing that will work to India's advantage is if China gets bogged down dealing with the problems that it faces in East Asia. The fact that the United States is building a balancing coalition in East Asia to deal with Taiwan, the South China Sea, and the East China Sea means that the Chinese are going to have to focus most of their attention on East Asia, not on the border with India. And this is good news. But again, at the same time, the Indians want to do everything they can to build up their conventional forces in that area.
One of the things the Chinese repeatedly tell, not just the Indians, but also to the Philippines, to Japan, to South Korea, is it's the United States that is drawing you all away into what they call a U.S. embrace. And it's the United States that is wanting to start some kind of a new Cold War here in East Asia. So it is a bit of a catch-22 for many of these smaller countries. When you have initiatives like the Quad, is that actually further accentuating more aggressive behavior by China? Or do you just step back and say, we don't want to poke the dragon in the eye?
Well, there's 2 points to be made about Chinese behavior. First is they do have powerful incentives to dominate Asia. I don't blame the Chinese at all for wanting to be a regional hegemon. If India could be a regional hegemon, it would pursue that goal. So I don't blame them for that. The second point is they have territorial goals that are outside of their hegemonic ambitions. For example, they want Taiwan back for nationalist reasons, not simply because they want to dominate Asia. They want to settle the border dispute with India on their own terms, independent of dominating Asia. So the Chinese have these two sets of reasons for wanting to be aggressive. They have a vested interest in changing the status quo, and they're willing to use military force to do that if it is possible. So this is what you're up against. And I think the idea that Americans are principally responsible for this new Cold War is wrong-headed. And I don't say that because I'm an American. The Americans would actually like to maintain the status quo. It's the Chinese who, for understandable reasons, want to change the status quo. The same thing is true with regard to the China-India border. It's China that wants to change it in its favor and thinks it will eventually have the power to do that. And this causes all sorts of problems for India.
Where do you see the war right now? What is your best understanding of what is the situation right now and what may likely give? Because ultimately this war can't seemingly go on forever. So something's got to give. What may that be?
Well, I think what's happened here is that the war has settled into a stalemate. And the Russians, who envision this as a limited military option, a limited military operation in the beginning, see it now more as a serious war. And they are increasing their forces on the battlefield. Putin has mobilized 300 plus thousand soldiers. And at the same time, they are destroying Ukraine's infrastructure. They're destroying its energy, its water, and its transportation systems. And in effect, what they're doing is they're wrecking Ukraine. And at the same time, they're continuing to fight these battles in places like the Donbass. But there's no evidence that the Ukrainians are going to lose anytime soon. And in fact, if it looks like the Ukrainians are losing, the Americans and their European allies will up the ante to back the Ukrainians. So I think this is going to go on for a long time. You asked the question, which many people ask, how does this end? I have no answer to that. I don't know. And I don't know anybody who has any confidence that they know how it's going to end.